To most of us, the idea that we are essentially sabotaging ourselves seems, at least on the surface, totally ludicrous, right? Why wouldn't we be on our own side? How could it be that we and not the world is the one holding us back from, say, attaining our highest potential? However, it's like we have a demon inside of us, right? Which has another goal or another purpose than merely creating for ourselves just an absolute full situation of bliss and harmony. It wants something more. It wants drama, it wants conflict, it wants adversity. So what the value of becoming aware of our own tendencies for self-sabotage, what it affords us, if we're serious about somehow merging with our higher selves or like attaining our highest potential, getting out of our own way is an absolute prerequisite. And so for obvious reasons, expanding our awareness on how we are getting in our own way is really one of the most powerful paths forward. Because as long as we're ignorant or asleep to the existence of this inner demon of self-sabotage, we are most definitely under its influence. So why is this profound or important? Well, one of the most prevalent or poignant examples of this is found if we look at our collective cultural self-sabotage. You can look at, say, for example, climate change, corruption, the deterioration of our democracies. And I bet you, if you ask anybody who is worried about these problems, they will say that they are absolutely for the figuring out and the working out of these problems. However, that's what we might be stating about these problems. But at the same time, we just keep voting for the same politicians that keep going to the same climate summits, coming back empty-handed, unable to work out a global solution, right? We want the change, but we keep making the same mistakes of electing officials who don't seem to give too many shits about it. And how do we spend our evenings? On mindless entertainment and anything other than demanding from our leaders a healthy relationship to nature. And so, as a species, we might end up going away from this place, right? Because we actually fucked up our own nest to a degree that it became uninhabitable. But if you ask us, we would all agree that this is a bad thing. And if you look at our actions, well, they tell a different story, right? And so we really have to get to terms with this fact that we might be claiming to want something on one side, but if we look at our own actions, they don't harmonize with this desire or this dream or this goal or whatever it might be, which is, to me, very, very interesting to behold. Self-sabotage might take many forms. Some of the most prevalent are, of course, things like procrastination, resistance, avoidance, which most of us, to some extent, of course, are familiar with. And it's not unfascinating to, once you start to contemplate this and realize that we are actually doing this, we are becoming our own obstacles, and we're doing it behind our own backs, which is quite a remarkable fact when you think about it. And once we start to pose the question of what lies beneath this mechanism, what drives this mechanism, obviously, it can be a whole host of things. It can be fear of success, or lacking a feeling of being deserving of success. It can be lack of belief in ourselves. It can be a form of self-hatred. It can be all kinds of patterns that have cropped up over our lives, old coping strategies that don't serve us anymore. Like, the amount of internal mechanisms that can be driving this self-sabotage are manifold. And attempting to understand them is the way through or out of this prison of our own minds, basically. However, when we start to look at what the value of what the affordances of awakening from this prison of our minds can provide us, we start to see that really the ultimate affordance of transcending this inner prison is essentially the union with our higher selves. So let's see if we can provide ourselves with a deeper understanding of our own internal workings in this area. Let's try and ask ourselves how to attend to self-sabotage, and what deeper purposes might this kind of behavior serve for certain parts of me, and why. One example that has been very poignant for me was around starting this YouTube channel, which took me the better part of a year to even get started from I made the choice. And what I realized was that behind a lot of my procrastination was really not a laziness, but actually the fear, right? Of the fear of putting yourself out there, the fear of being judged, the fear of producing something which is not quite on par or on point. And it's kind of interesting to behold how it manifested itself in what I thought was laziness, right? In these patterns of procrastination, which on the surface look basically like laziness, right? If you'd be willing to share your answer to this question, I would be very curious and very honored to read about it. But okay, so let's ask ourselves, how do we mitigate this weird internal psychological mechanism? Well, step number one, of course, is to acknowledge that it is even a mechanism, that it is in fact the case that despite seeming ludicrous, we are our own obstacles, not the world, not everybody else, not competition, not less than perfect circumstances. We are our own problem. We truly and really and deeply have to acknowledge this fact, first of all. Step number two is to understand that these kinds of behaviors and patterns, although it might not be obvious to us, they serve certain purposes for certain parts of us. They provide particular parts of us with certain affordances. Our ego might feel that these patterns keeps it being right about certain things. We have to understand that particular parts of us might want to be right about something rather than having success in whatever field, which might be their narrative or story that the world is out to get them, that they won't have success, that we won't have success. It might be fear, it might be self-hatred, it might be a whole host of things. And there's only one way of understanding this, and there's only one way of shedding light on this, and that is, of course, through introspection. It's just really, really important to understand that what looks like a self-destructive pattern to a certain part of us actually appears as, as an affordance, as a value unto itself, that certain parts of us need these self-sabotaging patterns because they provide us with some kind of perceived value. And so understanding the perceived value of a particular destructive behavior is highly important. Step three, once we have acknowledged that these destructive patterns serve some kind of maybe perverse purpose for some part of us, now we get to actually address this part that needs this destructive behavior and actually provide it with what it truly needs. It might be the inner child that needs safety. It might be the ego that needs a sense of reality. It might be many things. But once we understand that there is a part of us that engages in this destructive behavior because it feels it gets something from it, we can start interacting with this part and ask it what it really needs, what it really longs for in a healthy manner, and then provide it with that. And so through that, allowing it to relax and be less active and thus trip us up less with these kinds of self-sabotaging behaviors. And the deeper we start to recognize these self-sabotaging patterns, and the more intricate an understanding we start to get of it, the more we start to realize how these, on the surface, perverse patterns actually serve other purposes for certain parts of us. They will start losing their grip on us. And once that happens, liberation can start taking their place. But there's a problem, right? Because as with anything in the mind, it is riddled with particular traps. And one powerful trap to be aware of in attempting to do this particular work is really the trap of telling ourselves that we don't have any self-sabotaging behaviors, that this is not an issue for us, right? Which is, again, it's just this part of us that wants to self-sabotage without being discovered, that is in all likelihood trying to tell us that there's nothing to see here, right? We can disregard this whole area of inquiry. That would probably be the first and most powerful trap to fall in. The trap of merely telling ourselves, I'm good. However, one interesting aspect of this kind of work is really that it forces us to acknowledge that all these patterns and mechanisms and dynamics, where they live is really in the unconscious. And that means to try and address them, we have to orient ourselves and orient our focus towards the unconscious, where we will then start to discover all these kind of sub-identities basically fighting for dominance over us. And we will be able to start addressing them and start giving them what they need, thus making them relax, thus decreasing the power that these patterns have over us. And if we can do that, wow.